Before dawn, a border guard warms his hands and waits for a shift that is almost over. He hears something before he can place it, a sound too low and too even to be the wind. Somewhere beyond the tree line, something enormous is already moving toward him, and has been for hours. Poland had spent years preparing for a war it expected to fight like the last one. What was coming across that frontier was not that war. By dawn, German forces were moving across the frontier. The war Poland had prepared for was already becoming something else. In the weeks that followed, armies that had prepared for another great war would struggle to understand the speed of what was happening. The machine built in our last chapter had finally begun to move. The invasion plan was Fall Weiss, Case White. What followed would later become associated with a new word, Blitzkrieg. But there was no single Blitzkrieg blueprint being unfolded that morning. What Germany had built was a way of fighting that concentrated armor, aircraft, infantry, and communications to force breakthroughs and exploit them before an enemy could recover. Polish forces were not unprepared, and they were not cowardly. Poland could mobilize an army of roughly 1 million men, and its cavalry, despite a myth that would outlive the war itself, never once charged tanks with sabers. What Poland lacked was not courage, it was time. German aircraft struck airfields, rail junctions, communications, and troop movements within the first hours, disrupting Polish mobilization before it could fully take shape. Armored columns broke through weak points rather than testing strong ones, then kept moving instead of stopping to consolidate. By the time a Polish defense could organize around one breakthrough, German forces were already advancing toward the next. On the 17th of September, as Polish forces were still fighting in the west, the Soviet Union invaded from the east, honoring a secret agreement made with Germany only weeks earlier, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Poland was now fighting a war on two fronts, against two of Europe's largest armies. Warsaw held out under siege for nearly 3 weeks. By early October, organized Polish resistance had collapsed. Poland had not lost because its soldiers failed. It had lost because the war itself had changed shape faster than any single army could adapt to it. Britain and France had declared war on Germany within days of the invasion, honoring a guarantee made to Poland that summer. France did attempt a limited offensive into the Saar, a brief advance, quickly halted, but the offensive Poland desperately needed in the West never came. For the months that followed, an uneasy quiet settled over the Western Front, a stretch of the war so still that journalists on both sides began calling it the Phoney War. For nearly 7 months, French and British forces sat behind fortified lines and waited. German forces, exhausted from Poland, waited too. Some soldiers on both sides later described it less like a war and more like a tense, armed peace. Propaganda leaflets dropped instead of bombs. Patrols that avoided contact rather than sought it. The calm did not hold everywhere. In April of 1940, Germany moved again, this time north, into Denmark and Norway, partly to secure the iron ore shipments that traveled through Norwegian waters, and partly to deny Britain a foothold on Germany's northern flank. Denmark surrendered within hours. Norway resisted for 2 months, aided by British and French troops who arrived too late and too lightly equipped to hold the country. By June, Norway had fallen too. To the armies still waiting along the French border, the pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. Germany was not fighting one war at a time out of caution. It was fighting wherever it chose, whenever it chose, and winning faster than anyone expected. The quiet on the Western Front would not last much longer. On the 10th of May, 1940, Germany attacked in the west. French and British commanders expected a repeat of 1914, a German advance through Belgium, met head-on by Allied forces rushing to meet it. Much of the Allied army did exactly that, moving north into Belgium as planned. It was, in part, exactly what German planners had hoped they would do. Further south, through the Ardennes forest, terrain French commanders had judged too dense for a major armored advance, German tank divisions were already moving. The breakthrough, when it came where almost no one had expected to defend it. By the 14th of May, German armor had crossed the Meuse River. Within days, tank columns were racing across open French countryside toward the coast, moving faster than French commanders could redraw their own maps. The Allied armies in Belgium, expecting to fight the war in front of them, suddenly found the war was already behind them. By the 20th of May, German forces reached the English Channel. The Allied armies that had advanced into Belgium were now cut off, trapped against the coast near a small port town most of them had never heard of before that week, Dunkirk. Between the 26th of May and the 4th of June, in an operation named Dynamo, a hastily assembled fleet of Royal Navy ships and civilian boats evacuated over 300,000 Allied soldiers from the beaches at Dunkirk. It was, by any military measure, a defeat. Britain would call it a deliverance. The soldiers escaped. Their equipment did not. Tanks, artillery, and vehicles were left behind on the beaches in numbers that would take Britain months to replace. France fought on alone for 2 more weeks. On the 14th of June, German forces entered Paris without a battle. On the 22nd of June, France signed an armistice in the same railway carriage at the same location, where Germany had signed its own surrender at the end of the First World War. In 6 weeks, a campaign that French and British planners had expected to last years, fought over the same ground their fathers had fought over a generation earlier, was over. The word Blitzkrieg came from the press, not from German military planning. There was no single blueprint being executed with precision. What Germany had built was something less tidy and more dangerous, an army willing to move faster than its enemies could think. France and Britain had more tanks than Germany in May of 1940. In many cases, better tanks. Germany's advantage was not superior machinery. It was a different way of fighting with the machinery it had. German armored formations were connected by radio in a way many of their opponents were not, letting tank commanders react to opportunities in real time rather than waiting for orders to travel back through a chain of command. Officers at the front were trusted to exploit a breakthrough the moment they saw one, rather than pausing to confirm it with headquarters. Air power worked in direct coordination with the advancing columns, rather than as a separate campaign fought on its own schedule. Tempo mattered more than firepower. An army that kept moving forced its enemy to keep reacting, and an enemy that is only ever reacting never has the time to mount a real defense. Some of the advance even outran what German command itself had planned. Commanders like Heinz Guderian pushed their tanks forward faster than headquarters had authorized, gambling that speed and momentum mattered more than caution. It worked. This was not a flawless machine executing a perfect plan. It was an army built to take risks, facing an enemy still organized to refight the last war. And in 1940, that gap was enough to conquer a continent. By the end of June 1940, Germany controlled Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. But Britain did not surrender. Germany's armies had crossed Poland, Scandinavia, and Western Europe with extraordinary speed. The English Channel presented a different problem. Before an invasion could be attempted, Germany needed control of the skies. Through the summer and autumn of 1940, the Luftwaffe fought the Royal Air Force above Britain and failed to destroy it. The invasion never came. By the end of 1940, Germany had conquered more territory, more quickly than almost anyone had believed possible. But Britain was still fighting. and Hitler was already looking somewhere else. East. Beyond Germany's new frontier lay the Soviet Union. Millions of soldiers, thousands of miles of territory, and a war unlike anything the machine had yet been asked to fight. The victories of 1939 and 1940 had been built on speed. Hitler was about to gamble that speed could conquer distance itself. That is where our story continues.